The first time I caught a whiff of it, I thought maybe a raccoon had died under my deck. It was that bad. But raccoons don't explode across raised garden beds like a backed-up septic tank. I stood there, frozen, holding my morning coffee, staring at the mess in my backyard. My tomato plants were drowned in a bubbling brown soup. My cucumbers looked like they'd been through a war zone. The air was thick with the smell of human waste. For a second, I thought maybe it was some freak plumbing issue, until I saw the black hose snaking from the storm drain at the sidewalk all the way to my fence and over it. That's exactly when I knew. Barbara, I muttered. Barbara Holloway, president of the Whispering Elms Homeowners Association for the last 5 years and a tyrant since birth, most likely. She ran the HOA like a mini dictatorship. If your grass was a quarter-inch above regulation, you'd find a violation notice duct taped to your mailbox before sunrise. She once fined my neighbor for having a bird feeder because unsanctioned wildlife attractions were a legal liability. But this was criminal. I followed the hose back around the fence line, right to the storm drain on the curb. A cheap submersible pump sat there, still humming quietly, feeding the sewage straight from the neighborhood runoff into my backyard. I took photos. Lots of them. Then I went inside, rinsed my shoes, and called the city utilities department. The guy who answered said he'd dispatch someone immediately. I was halfway through explaining the setup when I heard the pump click off. I stepped back outside just in time to see Barbara khaki capris, HOA regulation clipboard in hand, picking up the hose like it was a garden snake she was trying to hide. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "Good morning, Everett," she said, like she hadn't just turned my vegetable garden into a biological hazard. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, walking toward her. "You pumped sewage into my yard. That's illegal. That's—" "Oh, don't be dramatic," she waved her hand. "It's just runoff. There's been a drainage issue on your side for months. We've had complaints. I simply redirected the overflow." "You redirected it into my food." Barbara shrugged. "You were warned. I sent a notice about your improper water diversion setup last month. You didn't respond." I took a deep breath. A notice that was about my rain barrel, not sewage. "Details matter, Everett," she said, turning with the hose coiled in her arms. I didn't say another word. I just stood there, watching her walk back across the street to her house, her perfectly trimmed hedges, her plastic flamingo garden decorations, and her stupid little HOA flag fluttering by her mailbox like she was the mayor of Crazy Town. But I wasn't going to do what she wanted, explode, start yelling, threaten lawsuits I couldn't afford. That's what she thrived on. Chaos, intimidation, and neighbors too broke or too tired to fight back. I'm not most neighbors. I'm Everett O'Connor. I teach high school chemistry. I built my own greenhouse from scratch last summer, and I've got time, patience, and a long memory. I'm also good with paperwork, and I was going to bury Barbara Holloway in hers. First thing I did was call the city again, this time requesting a formal environmental inspection. Then I went through my security footage from the night before, and bingo. At 2 in the morning, Barbara in a bathrobe dragging the hose across the street like a sewer ninja. I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 drives, and emailed a copy to myself. By noon, the city had sent out a guy named Reggie in a fluorescent vest who took one look at the brown sludge in my garden and said, "Yup, that's human waste." Then he turned to me and said, "You said this was directed from the storm drain?" "Yup," I said, popping the P for emphasis. "Who did it?" I pointed across the street. Barbara was pruning roses like she hadn't committed a federal violation before breakfast. He walked over without another word. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw her tighten up like a pressure cooker. She started waving her arms, pointing at my house, then gesturing toward the sky like God had sent the stormwater himself. Reggie didn't look impressed. By the time he left, she was red-faced and pacing her front porch. But I wasn't done. That evening, I called a buddy of mine, Eduardo, who owns a landscaping and soil company. He owes me a favor from helping his kid pass chemistry last year. I didn't ask for cash. I just asked for delivery of real, unfiltered, organic cow manure. 2 truckloads. I spent the next day constructing a simple retaining wall on the edge of her yard, just high enough to keep things from spilling into the street, but not so high that it'd be considered a permanent structure under HOA bylaws. Then I double-checked the property lines. Her flower beds extended 3 feet onto the community easement. Technically not her property. Public land. Perfect. Saturday morning, 7:30 sharp. The first truck rolled up. Barbara was still in her robe, clutching her mug like a lifeline when the driver, tattoos, sunglasses, and a smile that said he knew exactly what this was about, tipped the bed and let loose a wave of manure that flooded her front yard. The second truck arrived 20 minutes later. By the time the last drop sloshed out, her yard looked like a cow apocalypse. She came storming out in rubber boots, waving her phone. "What do you think you're doing? This is harassment. This is a violation of HOA regulations." I held up a printed document. "Actually, Barbara, this is a community beautification project. I submitted a request to amend the soil on the community easement. Approved yesterday. By the city." She blinked. "You can't, this is toxic." I grinned. "Nope. Tested. Fully organic. Unlike the raw sewage you dumped in my garden. Speaking of which, the city wants a word with you. Something about a Class C environmental violation." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned to the driver. "You take care of the rest?" He nodded. "Left a pile in the back, too." "Just like you asked." Barbara stomped back into her house, probably to call a lawyer. But the best part came 10 minutes later when 2 city code enforcement officers pulled up with Reggie and a clipboard. I didn't even need to watch. I just sat on my porch sipping coffee, the smell of justice thick in the air. By Monday morning, the neighborhood smelled like a dairy farm that had lost its mind. I'd gotten used to it faster than I expected. Barbara, on the other hand, was unraveling like a cheap sweater. She'd spent the weekend trying to shovel the manure into contractor bags. But the sheer volume made it a hopeless task. Her landscaper had quit over the phone. Her porch plants were buried. Her lawn flamingos were waist-deep in compost. The decorative gnome by her walkway was now just a hat poking out of a soil tsunami. I was sitting on my porch grading chemistry quizzes when a white sedan with county plates rolled up. Not code enforcement this time. The emblem on the door said, "Department of Public Health." The man who stepped out wore glasses and carried a clipboard under one arm and a rolling case in the other. He didn't bother knocking on her door first. He walked straight to the edge of the street and started taking samples from the gutter. A second car pulled up behind him. This one was unmarked, but the woman who stepped out flashed a badge to Barbara, who had come out in a scarf and oversized sunglasses like she thought hiding her identity would protect her from federal law. The woman didn't even give her a chance to talk. She showed her something in a folder, and Barbara's posture shifted from defensive to panicked. I didn't need to hear it to know what was happening. Dumping raw sewage even under the guise of stormwater redirection violated a whole cocktail of statutes. Environmental laws, municipal health codes, and if the city's water testing confirmed contamination, possibly even state-level criminal charges. Barbara kept pointing across the street toward me like this was some kind of setup. But the investigator was uninterested. She walked the perimeter of Barbara's yard, took several photos of the pump still sitting near the drain, and collected more samples from the hose that had been coiled and tucked behind a hedge. She didn't knock on my door, but she did glance my way and give a single nod. I nodded back. Later that afternoon, I got a knock from someone I hadn't expected to see so soon. Officer Linda Moreno, local PD. She was sharp, always by the book, and had a reputation for not caring about HOA politics. She used to patrol the area before they reassigned her downtown, but apparently someone had pulled her back for this mess. "I'm just here to get your statement," she said, pulling a recorder from her pocket. "We've got photos, video surveillance, testimony from the city inspector, and now a confirmed positive test for E. coli in the runoff. But I want your version on record. You know how it goes." I brought her inside. We sat at the dining table while I laid out the photos I'd printed, the flash drive with the security footage, and the documentation I'd received from the city after my initial complaint. She listened quietly, occasionally jotting down notes. "Did she ever send you anything in writing before doing this?" Linda asked. I pulled out the so-called notice Barbara had taped to my door weeks ago. It was a poorly worded document citing a completely irrelevant bylaw about unauthorized irrigation infrastructure. Not only did it have no legal foundation, but it also wasn't signed by any other board members, just Barbara. Linda held it up to the light, then took a photo with her phone. "She used HOA letterhead for this?" she asked. "Sure did," I said. "I checked the HOA bylaws. Any enforcement action has to go through a vote. She never held one. There's no meeting record. Linda exhaled slowly. If she used her HOA title to commit a crime under the guise of authority, that's impersonation of a public official. That bumps it up. She's been doing this kind of thing for years, I said. Just never this obviously. After taking my full statement, Linda stood up and slid the flash drive into an evidence bag. You'll be hearing from the DA's office, she said. Once they sort through the legal angles, they'll probably want you to testify. Happy to, I said. And if they need backup, half the neighborhood has stories. By Tuesday, the story had leaked, no pun intended. Someone in the city office must have tipped off the local paper because a small article appeared in the Whispering Gazette under the headline, HOA President Under Investigation for Alleged Sewage Dumping. They'd used a photo of Barbara from the neighborhood 4th of July picnic, ironic considering she'd banned sparklers that year. The comments section exploded. Residents who'd been too afraid or too apathetic to speak up before were suddenly coming forward with their own tales. Fines over invisible oil spots, threats for parking more than 2 inches from the curb, letters demanding removal of unauthorized porch decor, and even a claim that Barbara had tampered with a neighbor's mailbox under the guise of compliance checks. The HOA Facebook group, which Barbara had always moderated with an iron fist, was flooded with screenshots, photos, and long overdue receipts. Someone posted a video of her yelling at a teenager for skateboarding on the sidewalk. Another uploaded a blurry image of her measuring grass with a tape measure. The next day, the group was locked down and turned private. But it was too late. The neighborhood had turned against her. By Thursday, the HOA board, what was left of it, called an emergency meeting. It was supposed to be held in the clubhouse, but so many people showed up that it spilled onto the lawn. Folding chairs were dragged out. Someone brought a microphone and portable speakers. People were mad. Not just about the sewage or the fines or the power trips. They were angry about the silence. About being afraid of their own front yards. I sat in the back, arms crossed, listening to the chaos. A woman named Carla, who lived on the next street over, stood up and held a stack of papers over her head. These are recall petitions, she said. We have enough signatures to remove Barbara Holloway from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. A cheer broke out. Someone clapped. Another person shouted, finally. Barbara wasn't there. Unsurprisingly, she'd gone radio silent since the investigators showed up. Her porch lights had been off for 2 nights. No trash bins out. No cars in the driveway. I suspected she was lawyering up. Didn't matter. The damage was done. The board voted to suspend all HOA enforcement actions until a full audit could be completed. Carla was named interim president, and the first order of business was hiring a third-party firm to review HOA finances. Turns out Barbara had been charging residents administrative fees that didn't exist, tucking them into quarterly dues and skimming off the top. Not a lot, just enough to go unnoticed. But over 5 years, it added up to tens of thousands. That's when the real authorities got involved. The state attorney general's office opened a file. Charges were filed. Fraud, environmental violations, misuse of funds, and impersonation of a public official. When they finally arrested her, it was quiet. Plainclothes officers, no cuffs in public. But word got around. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just spent the evening quietly replanting my tomatoes. The soil had been replaced by Eduardo's team with sterilized compost. I wore gloves, took my time, and placed each shoot with care. The neighborhood started changing too. People waved more. Kids rode bikes again without getting scolded for unlicensed recreation. Someone even put up a little free library on the corner, a project Barbara had blocked 3 times before. And me? I just went back to teaching. But I did install a new sign next to my front gate. It read, "No unauthorized dumping. Violators will be composted." By the following week, the neighborhood had shifted into a strange limbo, half celebration, half suspicion. Barbara's arrest shook Whispering Elms like an earthquake. People had started mowing their lawns later in the day, daring to leave their trash cans out past noon, even hanging wind chimes like they'd been unshackled from some unwritten rulebook. But beneath that tentative freedom was a shared question. How deep did the rot go? I had a feeling we'd only scraped the surface. The interim board, led by Carla, had brought in a local accounting firm to audit the HOA's finances. They were supposed to comb through 5 years of records, bank statements, contracts, meeting minutes, all of it. But within 3 days of starting, they ran into a wall. It's not just missing receipts, Carla said when she dropped by my place, visibly worn down. Entire digital files are gone. Like, deleted? Not archived. Not misplaced. Gone. I motioned for her to sit on the porch swing, brushing sawdust off the seat. I'd been fixing the railings earlier that morning. Carla looked like she hadn't slept since the vote. Let me guess, I said. No backups? Only from 2 years ago, she said. And even those are spotty. Half the PDFs are password protected with no one knowing the passwords, and the rest are just scanned paper copies, some of them crooked, like she didn't even try to make them legible. What about the treasurer? I asked. Carla gave a hollow chuckle. You mean her cousin, Dale? Yeah, he resigned the day after the story broke. Left a one-sentence email and vanished. His house has been dark since Saturday. My stomach tightened. Have you told the investigators? I asked. We did, she said. And they're taking it seriously. A county forensics team is coming in to recover whatever they can from the HOA laptop, but it's slow going. I stood up. Something in Carla's voice didn't sit right. Not just fatigue, it was unease. Like she was circling a truth but didn't quite want to say it aloud. What are you not telling me? I asked. She hesitated. There's a line item, she said finally. Titled Community Enhancement Fund. It's vague, but over 4 years, nearly $80,000 was routed into it. And we can't trace where it went. No invoices. No contractor info. Just withdrawals. I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. Do you think she was laundering it? I asked. We don't know yet. But it gets worse. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, actually. Most were between Barbara and someone named MP Holdings. The subject lines were innocuous: schedule update, project status, funds received. But one caught my eye immediately. The subject line read, final transfer confirmed. Who's MP Holdings? I asked. That's the thing, Carla said. It's not a real company. We ran it through state business registries. It's a shell. No registered agent. Just a P.O. box on the other side of the county. I leaned against the porch rail, absorbing it all. She siphoned HOA funds into a ghost account, I said. And probably paid herself through it. That's what the investigators think. But until they can crack the encryption on her personal laptop, they're stuck. I rubbed my jaw. You want me to talk to someone? Carla looked at me sideways. You know someone? My brother-in-law works cyber crimes for the state AG's office, I said. He's not allowed to freelance, but if I tell him what we've got, he can push it to someone who can prioritize the case. She looked relieved, like someone had finally cracked a window in a smoke-filled room. Please, she said. Do it. That night, I called Owen. He didn't say much at first, just listened. Then he asked me to send everything: emails, financial records, even the HOA bylaws. Less than an hour later, he called back. Everett, he said. This is bigger than your neighborhood. How big are we talking? The shell company MP Holdings. It's linked to 3 other flagged entities we've been tracking. They're all part of a laundering network tied to municipal contracts. If your HOA was moving money into it, she wasn't working alone. I sat down, stunned. You think Barbara was part of a ring? She might not even know the full picture, Owen said. These setups use middlemen. She could have been pocketing a cut in exchange for routing funds without asking questions. Can you take the case? Not me, he said. But I'm forwarding it to our financial crimes unit. And Everett, don't talk to anyone else about this. If this ring is active, they'll be watching who's digging. The next morning, Carla called again. 2 more residents had come forward, both retired, both claiming Barbara had pressured them into signing compliance agreements that involved paying lump sum fees directly to her personal Venmo. Neither had questioned it at the time. Barbara told them it was to settle back dues quietly. I asked Carla to send me one of the agreements. It was typed, poorly formatted, and included a line that made my blood run cold: resident waives right to appeal fines in exchange for expedited resolution. It was a signature trap. And it had worked. I want to do something, I said. Not just legal. Public. This can't disappear into a courtroom and get plea bargained into a footnote. Carla nodded solemnly. We're planning a town hall. Open mic. Let people talk. Document everything. I'll be there. When the night came, the community center was packed. Folding chairs overflowed into the hallway. A local news crew had set up near the back wall, their cameras already rolling. A whiteboard near the front read, Whispering Elms, voice your story. Carla stepped up to the mic first, gave a brief statement acknowledging the investigation, then opened the floor. What followed was a parade of voices: shaky, angry, some tearful, all sharing what they'd endured. A woman named Denise, who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, recounted how her late husband had fought Barbara on a zoning complaint and how, after he passed, Barbara revoked his memorial bench and had it removed without notice. A young couple described how they were fined for hosting a backyard wedding even though they'd filed all the correct permits. Barbara had told them it disrupted the community aesthetics. Then came a man I didn't recognize at first. Tall, sunburned, with a stiff gait. He introduced himself as Mark Hollis, Barbara's former contractor. "I was hired to build a gazebo for the community park," he said. "Got half the payment up front. Finished the work. Submitted the final invoice. Never got paid. She told me the board rejected the structure as unauthorized and demanded I take it down. When I refused, she called code enforcement and got it condemned." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I lost 2 clients because of that," Mark said. "Now I find out the board never even saw the project plans? She lied to all of us." I stepped up to the mic last. Not because I had the most to say, but because I wanted to end it with clarity. "I teach chemistry," I said. "I believe in evidence. In cause and effect. Barbara pumped sewage into my yard. That's not a figure of speech. That happened. And yes, I retaliated with organic manure. But what we've uncovered since is worse than any one act of spite." I paused, scanning the crowd. She didn't just break the rules. She used our trust to fund a criminal operation. And I won't let that fade into bureaucracy. We deserve to know where every dollar went. We deserve to see her face the full weight of the law. Applause broke out, not loud, but solid. A wave of shared resolve. The town hall ended after nearly 3 hours. Reporters interviewed residents in the parking lot. Carla walked up to me near my truck. "You were right," she said. "This is more than just a bad president. It's systemic." I nodded. "Which means we fix it from the ground up." And we did. A new charter was drafted. Power was redistributed across subcommittees. No more unchecked authority. Every enforcement action now required a paper trail co-signed by at least 3 board members. All finances had to be published monthly on a public ledger, accessible to every resident. Barbara's trial was scheduled for the following spring. Federal charges were added. The shell company she'd been funneling money into was tied to a developer bribery scheme in 3 other counties. Her plea deal fell apart when investigators found a second set of ledgers, hidden in a false panel behind her garage drywall. She was sentenced to 8 years. As for her house, the bank reclaimed it. Foreclosure signs went up, followed by a for sale listing that sat for months. No one wanted to live in the house that symbolized years of fear. Eventually, it was bought by a young couple. They replaced the flamingos with a porch swing. No flags, no clipboards, just wind chimes and potted lavender. The neighborhood healed slowly, but it healed. And me? I kept my garden. Grew peppers that year. Big, red, and hot enough to make your eyes water. Every time I bit into one, I tasted victory. By the time frost began to dust the rooftops of Whispering Elms, Barbara Holloway's name had become a cautionary tale whispered between hedges and passed over fences like a ghost story. But the deeper we dug, the more tangled her legacy became. The surface-level sewage stunt had only been the gateway. What came next proved she hadn't just been an overzealous HOA president. She had, for years, operated as a local tyrant with a paper crown, quietly funneling resident dues into a maze of falsified expenses and illicit contracts, all while hiding behind a clipboard and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. After the town hall, more residents began submitting written statements, some through lawyers. One elderly man, Mr. Gleason from the cul-de-sac near the east entrance, revealed he had been billed twice for the same fence repair, once by the HOA and once by a contractor Barbara insisted he use. When the contractor was contacted, there was no record of ever being paid by the HOA. The check he received came from a separate account entirely, one tied to the same shell company Carla and I had uncovered. That revelation cracked the door wide open. The state's Financial Crimes Unit subpoenaed HOA banking records and uncovered not only the Community Enhancement Fund but 3 additional accounts registered under different variations of the HOA's name. These accounts had been used to wire payments to Barbara's personal accounts and to 3 other individuals, including Dale, the former treasurer, and a man named Anthony Carver, who had never lived in the neighborhood but had somehow received over $30,000 in consulting fees. Everett, the money trail's worse than we thought, Owen said over the phone one evening. She didn't just skim. She embezzled, laundered, and misrepresented over $200,000 across 5 years. The paper trail is enough to bury her and her co-conspirators. I didn't respond at first. I was standing in my greenhouse, surrounded by the faint smell of basil and mint, watching the condensation bead on the glass. The idea that someone could get away with robbing their neighbors in broad daylight, hiding behind bureaucracy and fear, made my blood run cold. What's the next move? I asked. We're issuing indictments by the end of the week. State charges, federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, you name it. And the others? Carver's already in custody. Dale fled to Arizona, but we've got a warrant out. If he tries to open a bank account or buy a cup of coffee, we'll know. By the following Monday, marked black SUVs lined the curb in front of Barbara's old house. Though it had sat empty for months, the investigators had obtained a second search warrant after uncovering an encrypted hard drive that had been missed during the first sweep. They found it behind a false wall panel in the attic, layered beneath insulation and sealed with an old HOA meeting flyer. The drive contained detailed ledger files, scanned documents with forged signatures, and even audio recordings of private board meetings where Barbara had outlined how to handle non-compliant residents. By fabricating violations and inflating legal threats to scare people into paying fines quickly. One file in particular stopped the auditors cold. It was labeled Leverage, and inside were photos taken covertly of residents' homes, some with timestamps indicating late-night surveillance. Notes accompanied the images: threaten code enforcement, flag illegal structure, no permit filed, submit fake anonymous complaint to city force inspection. They had been using fear as currency. This was no longer just about money. It was about psychological warfare. 3 days later, I was summoned to testify before the state grand jury. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing a clean shirt and the same boots I'd worn the morning I found my garden flooded. I didn't dress up for them. I wasn't there to impress a jury. I was there to tell the truth. When it was my turn, I stepped into the wood-paneled room and walked past Barbara, who sat at the defense table flanked by 2 attorneys. Her hair was shorter now, grayer, and she no longer looked like the queen of the cul-de-sac. She looked like what she was, someone who got caught. She didn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor asked me to recount the events of the sewage incident, but more importantly, to outline the pattern of behavior that had led to it. I did just that. I brought the photos, the footage, the letters, and even the original hose she'd used, preserved in a plastic bin and stored in my garage since the day she tried to clean up her crime. Mr. O'Connor, the prosecutor asked, in your opinion, was this an isolated act of retaliation or part of a broader pattern of abusive behavior by the defendant? I didn't hesitate. It was the tip of the iceberg. She used her position to intimidate, manipulate, and exploit residents who didn't have the time, energy, or knowledge to fight back. I just happened to be the first one who did. When I stepped down, Barbara finally looked at me just for a moment. There was no apology in her gaze, no remorse, only resentment. The jury returned indictments on all counts. Barbara was taken into custody immediately. Her attorneys tried to stall sentencing, but the volume of evidence made a plea bargain impossible. The judge handed down a 12-year sentence, 8 to serve, with 4 suspended conditional on full restitution to the HOA and affected residents. Meanwhile, Dale was apprehended in Flagstaff after attempting to open a storage unit under a false name. He flipped quickly, providing testimony that revealed Barbara had been approached by Carver, who promised access to a secondary revenue stream in exchange for laundering funds through HOA fronts. She jumped at the opportunity. Carver, it turned out, was part of a broader network of con artists who preyed on small HOAs across the state, offering consulting services and then siphoning funds through shell companies. Whispering Elms wasn't the first neighborhood they'd targeted, but thanks to our case, it was the last. The state launched a task force to review HOA oversight policies, and Whispering Elms became the pilot neighborhood for a new program requiring independent audits and city oversight for all HOA financial activity. Carla was appointed to an advisory committee, and I was asked to consult on transparency practices. I declined the title. I didn't want a position. I wanted peace. By spring, the neighborhood had transformed. The community garden, once blocked by Barbara for violating green space restrictions, was up and running, with residents donating tools, seeds, And time every weekend. The old newsletter had returned, this time written by a rotating group of volunteers. It featured things like bake sale announcements and reminders about block parties, not veiled threats about lawn heights. One sunny afternoon, I was planting marigolds along the fence when a boy rode by on his bike, slowed down, and called out, "Hey, Mr. O'Connor. My mom says thanks for the tomatoes." I waved and he sped off down the street, his tires kicking up dust. Carla passed by a few minutes later, holding a box of flyers for the upcoming spring fair. She stopped at the gate. "You staying on his garden committee chair?" she asked. "No titles," I said, patting the soil. "Just dirt and vegetables." She laughed. "Fair enough. Oh, and we're putting together a neighborhood archive. Preserving the history. I was thinking about adding a section about everything that happened. Not to glorify it, but to make sure it's remembered. I considered it for a moment. Only if it includes everyone's names. The ones who stood up. The ones who stayed silent. All of it. "That's the plan," she said. "No more shadows." As she walked off, I looked up at the house across the street. New shutters. Fresh paint. A wind chime hanging from the porch. The couple who moved in had 2 dogs and a baby on the way. They didn't know the full history of what had happened there. And maybe they didn't need to. The past belonged to us. But the future that was up for planting. Just like everything else.